Alrighty everyone, and welcome to another Flicks Done Quick movie review. And in this movie review, I will be doing the new Netflix film, at least I think it's a Netflix film, Mercy Black. And so you might know this, but I like horror movies. I talk about horror movies a lot. That's one of my favorite genres, if not my favorite genre. And there's two kinds of horror movies. There's the horror movie where it's just a fun movie to watch. It's got the Friday the 13th kind of stuff. And then you got the more psychological, kind of horror movies. And this is a nice mixture of the two. That I really liked. The psychological aspect of this movie, which in a lot of movies is usually just kind of cheap, and modern horror is mostly really cheesy, right? So I was expecting this to be a lot more cheesier than it actually is. The movie itself, watching it, it's a very boring movie. If you're not someone that likes horror, you might find this boring. But the movie's got a lot of hints, and it's got a lot of, things in it that, lead you on the breadcrumb trail of, figuring out kind of, the story as it goes along. And so first, before we get more into the detail, spoiler alert here, I just want to give a quick shout-out to Rolf the dog. They actually had a line where they introduced the doggy, and the lady was like, oh yeah, his name is Rolf, like the Muppet. And later on, the doggy's dead. And so just a moment of silence for the dead doggy, who should not have died in this film. But just a moment of silence. Alright, so with that being out of the way, the whole movie's premise is kind of something happens to someone as a kid, and then they kind of they being society kind of tells her it wasn't real, oh, you're just schizophrenic, that kind of stuff, and it turns out, was it real? The whole movie is kind of based around figuring out if it was real. So, that's the prologue, and the prologue leaves a lot of things unexplained, and it's kind of a flash of events, that occur for, a bunch of young girls. So then, later on, it shows, this girl's been in care for a little bit, and then she gets released from the hospital, and basically she's been completely isolated, and, that event that happened to her as a kid kind of, became, a thing that, people heard about, and people, it inspired things, and it was kind of it's a little bit like Slender Man, they kind of make it out to be. But either way, the whole movie is kind of spent with her trying to, assimilate back into her old family house with, her sister and her, nephew, and it's she's having a lot of these visions, but the movie is set up in a way that you don't know if it's real or not. So, and they do a really good job of doing this. So there's a lot of fake outs, and I'm not going to spoil each individual one, but there's a lot of fake outs where they go oh, it's real, it's got to be real, and then it's wait a second, no, it's this guy, and then that guy's dead. But then it's oh wait, no, it's her, that's the villain, it's not a supernatural villain, it's just her in a suit, right? But no, at the end, it turns out that it was an actual supernatural villain. Spoiler alert. Yeah, it's just I don't know, I really like the aspect of, movies that keep me guessing I find are pretty good. I've seen so many horror movies at this point that it's I can normally guess what's gonna happen, and usually I'm correct. But, this one, I really, I was kind of solid on it's a real thing, but it's faking me out kind of thing until the end, where then one of the girls from the original incident who disappeared comes back and shows her finger off, and her finger's chopped off, because that's what happened in the prologue. So at that point I was it's got to be her. So it's not a supernatural villain. That explains everything. You know what I mean? And then at literally the last 10 seconds of the movie is they just, oh yeah, it's a real supernatural thing. And I thought it was really well done. I really thought it was absolutely well done. Obviously it's not a perfect movie, but I like to judge this kind of stuff on did it scare me? I mean, I've watched so many horror movies and played so many horror games, and I've been through so many horrific experiences that it's not really. But at the same time, the plot kept me guessing, and it kept me interested in it, and it had a lot of those little things that it showed across the screen that you have to pay attention to. And that's kind of what I like in horror movies. I love when horror movies are kind of like a puzzle you're figuring out. And for this movie, I thought it did a really good job at that. So I don't know what kind of horror movies y'all like, but if that's the kind of thing you like, then this is definitely up your alley. I would definitely recommend it.